So,
Hmm.
okay, with now, if we look at mind, the part
Hmm.
of the mind. Now, they say that 70 to 80% of what we die of, get sick and die from, is related to stress. I would put that at 100%, really, if you
And
think
right, you
about
could
it.
broaden your definition of stress. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I
Keep
mean,
going. You're
yeah,
doing great.
whatever level it comes from, but excessive, feelings of stress over a period of time
Mhm.
at whatever level it's occurring is going to create a problem. There was I think a study that was done look at on Wall Street. That's like the stress that comes from being sleep deprived. Sleep deprived
Mhm.
stockbrokers on Wall Street. It was
Oh
like
my God.
they're generally, most of them are men. They would make they would There are incidents of making bad decisions because they were sleep deprived and stressed, would go up to something like 70 to 80%. So most of the time they were making bad decisions.
Hmm. I
I
don't
mean,
doubt that for a second. Right.
so I mean, just that the stress of not getting sufficient sleep is,
Hmm.
it sets up a whole cascade of stresses, from work to
Hmm.
home to just walking down the street. That I remember somebody saying to me once that, a whole war started because somebody got up out of the bed on the wrong side of the bed, because they yelled at that person who yelled at that person, and it just cascaded into and blew up into this whole big thing. And, it's true. I think that we're living in a very stressful world, and things we're likely to become stressed and upset and angry at the drop of a hat these days.
Hmm.
And we're not taught critical skills like conflict resolution or logic. And so the
Hmm.
first argument of choice is to get into a fight or worse. So what else do you see in terms of stresses on the mind? I mean, you have your daily stresses, the stress and strain of just standing up, right? Is a stress on the
Hmm.
body. But what other kinds of things that come to mind when we talk stress? Because it's such a broad word, can be applicable to so many things.
Yeah, sure. Well, when it comes to stress or when it comes to the mind, I guess recognizing what was helpful to me is that we are meaning-making machines. We cannot help but think in terms of story, and we tell ourselves story. And since none of us are God, we don't know everything. We can't fill every gap of every unknown factor that is relevant to our lives. And so we believe other people's stories, and it's kind of who tells the best story wins a lot of the time, which has its own implications for COVID. But let's just stick with the fact that we humans tell ourselves the person that cuts us off in traffic, and we can make up any number of stories as to what that person was doing or what they were thinking or what kind of character they have.
Mm.
And there's a good chance we're going to be wrong about that. And when we recognize that we often reason from unverified assumptions about life, and it's the unverified assumptions that can lead us to a storytelling that really isn't grounded in anything true. And the absence of truth in our ability to frame reality often creates these mental splinters. It creates these friction points where the story I'm telling myself doesn't line up with what I'm seeing, and now I'm frustrated. And it's the narrative lattice, if you will, the framework with which we hang the stories to fill the gaps of what we don't know, that then spills over into the emotional state that we end up with. And that storytelling, inevitably, since we can't separate thought, turns into emotion, positive or negative, or just more or less peaceful. And that reality of how we are wired to frame our lives through story, once we kind of get it that this is what I'm doing, there's an ability to step back and say, wait, do I really know that? Could I prove that? And one of
Mhm.
the ways that's been most helpful for me working with clients is to be able to kind of present the idea that logic and emotion work best when they're peers, when one can't dominate the other. And when we all kind of have this internal, like I've come to call it the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney. And usually, for most people, especially when they're in these loops of swirling anxiety or where they're hard on themselves, the prosecuting attorney is a mean bully who never has to actually defend the accusations he makes. He just gets to come rule the room like a bull in a china shop, bossing around and telling you stories and half truths and not and leaving out particular details. And when you can bring the defense attorney, like, hang on, okay, I'm willing to hear anything fair that you have to say, and I'm not perfect, so I can get better. But like, what were you expecting? I'm going to stay up all night and never get sleep, or that I was going to be perfect somehow. And you start to let a defense attorney grow a spine and have some muscle and get that sucker in shape. You start to let logic and the mind go to work cognitively on storytelling, on gap filling, on trying to bring word and give voice to emotion. And
Mhm.
that has been some of the deepest, funnest work I've been able to do with people over the years. So, anyway, that's one thing I could say about that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you say that because it's about for me, I find that working with clients, it's about being able to step back, get them to step back,
Hmm.
as exactly like
Yeah,
you were saying, step back from themselves slightly and be able to observe, become
right.
the interested observer of themselves, and that it can take discipline, but it can also there are also tools that can be used to help people to do that. One tool
Right.
that I use is vibrational essences because it helps you to learn what is me and what is not me. So you start to separate out those stories that that I was always told that such and such and such is true, and I've come to believe that, but I know now, because I've been able to step back from it and see it. Now I know that doesn't really resonate with me. That's not me. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's about whatever tool that is brought to bear. It's about being able to um, be able to observe oneself in a more objective fashion without without the blind spots, without the
Right. Well,
the defense attorney going into overdrive. I mean,
yeah, where you're too defensive that you can't learn anything. Right.
yeah, exactly.
That's not healthy either. Yeah.
Right. So, and then we come to the level of the more ethereal part of ourselves, this more spiritual part of ourselves,
Hmm.
the part that lights the body when we're in it, and the body becomes empty when it's not there. So whether people believe that there's a spirit or not, there's something that that
Hmm.
separates from the body at some point. Now,
Hmm.
how is that when you work with your clients in that sense? What is it that
Hmm.
you look at or focus on?
Well, again, it does come back a lot to storytelling. So I can
Mm-hmm.
speak from a Christian frame because that's the one I know well, and that's where I operate from and how I kind of make meaning of the world. But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, the recognition that this whole grand adventure of life, this universe that we observe, came from somewhere. And if we don't have intellectually and emotionally satisfying answers to the biggest questions of our existence. Where do we come from? What happens when we die? Who actually sets the standards for morals and ethics? And what is the nature of being human? Those are kind of at least four of the big heavy hitter questions when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to framing life through a spiritual frame.
Right.
And if there are, I don't think a spiritual frame has to just believe it. It doesn't make sense, but just trust it. Like, I think
Mm.
that's intellectually lazy. I think it does have underpinnings, and there will always be mystery in the spiritual realm, but it should actually have something that we could quantify and make sense of, and allow the best theories the world has ever come up with related to how to answer those. The
Mm.
best book I know of is actually called The Universe Next Door, which analyzes all major worldviews through a set of questions that every worldview has to try to answer. And it really does. Um, when you can answer them in a satisfactory way, both intellectually and emotionally, it's like your soul can finally rest. And for me, I find that in the Christian perspective, and that yeah, I can take a deep breath and my soul is satisfied because I know I was made in the image of God, and that He says I'm worthy, and that's enough. And that my
Mm.
adequacy does not depend upon my ability to execute enough good things, hopefully, and squeeze them into a life, and therefore I
Mm.
can be accepted. And to me, if that doesn't mean somebody else has to agree with that to find more peace, but that to me is how I can rest, and it guides me the idea of being made in the image of God. Well, what longings do we have that might be a reflection of His image? And it helps guide me to better questions
Mm.
and framing concepts of what reality really is, so that we can have some satisfactory answers to the big questions of our lives. And in that frame, kind of find rest for the soul. If to me, if I don't have a foundation like that, it's hard to build an answer to the so what questions or why bother questions, or But when there is, and your soul's at peace, and then you see your life through the lens of purpose, and then now I'm a storyteller I'm a student of reality as best I am able, trying to go through this life making sense of some of what I can see and can't see. That helps me um, at least find better questions to give people more peaceful, hopeful, flourishing lives.
Hmm. Good. I mean, I think it's everyone has their own perspective. I mean, I also come from a Christian background, and it's part of
Mhm.
my life. It's part of who I am. But I also have many friends, family as well, that are, practice other religions or no
Mhm.
religion,
Yeah,
perhaps.
right.
And I think being a good human being doesn't necessarily hinge upon us practicing in a certain way or believing in a certain way, as long as I think, leaves them, it includes themselves and other people somehow in the equation in a beneficial way rather than, one-upmanship kind of attitude. So
Hmm.
I try to meet people where they are, and I think that is the most humanistic way of behaving. Just to be able to step outside of my own reality, perhaps for a time, and then to enter into theirs for a bit. And
Yeah, well, learning to see through other people's eyes can go a long way to it's humbling to be able to fascinatedly ask questions and help understand where someone's coming from.
Mhm,
And when these kind of discussions can be framed in a learning mindset rather than a combative one, it really can, because yeah, at the end of the day, we're all human and we all long for the same things. I've never met anybody who doesn't crave justice or love or health. There's so many
mhm,
things we do share in common. And the more we focus on those, the kinder and more approachable it is to get to some of these spiritual, ethereal questions like you're talking about.
mhm. Wow. I said, now that we've solved all of the problems of the universe,
Didn't take long.
that's right. I just look at how we can address some of the issues. Not, of course, not all of them, but some of the issues
Mhm.
that we've looked at here. Starting again, going body, mind, spirit. I mean, what can we do, especially with people with limited budgets these days? And
Mhm.
that's what's driven in large part the epidemic of obesity. It's eating, and there's no doubt about this. People have experimented on themselves and seen the difference. That
Mhm.
fast food makes us. It's very fatty, high in carbs, high in fats, and it makes people gain weight. And it's the unfortunately it's of those who have the least amount of money who eat the most amount of fast food because it's cheap and cheerful and filling with
Yeah.
disastrous consequences. So I mean, yes, watching what we put in our mouths is
Mhm.
essential. And now one thing that I was impressed by is that in our neighbor to the south here, the health of people were improved vastly. In fact, the um, what is it? What do they call it? The average lifespan for um, Cubans in Cuba, as in during the Castro years, was actually
Mhm.
better than in the U.S. The longevity rates.
Yeah. I don't doubt that.
And but what one thing that was asked of people or mandated to the people was to use their terraces, use their balconies, use their backyards to grow food. And I've grown food on a patio using grow
Mm.
bags and whatnot. And there is nothing to me more satisfying as well as more healthy as being able to grow your own food, even if it's just salad greens. But
Mhm.
try to find innovative ways using hanging baskets for cherry tomatoes, whatever it is, to be
Mhm.
able to introduce healthier food, because the like I said, the water has microplastics in it. We're full of microplastics. They don't even know what that's going to be doing to our health in future.
Mhm.
There's all kinds of heavy metals, all kinds of stuff in our food, in the earth. The earth itself is being depleted. So what we can do to kind of help the process is to perhaps turn things around a bit is to grow something of our own, even if it's small. On a little piece of
Yeah.
patio, you can use grow bags. Works great. I grew potatoes that way.
Yeah. Well, you're right. There are so many, like, we have a humble garden in our own yard as well. And it's one of the easiest things you can do, theoretically. There's the logistics of it, but simple things you could do, I should say, is try to grow some of your own food.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're expanding it beyond food. You can just look at the products you use on the day to day, and so many of them are highly toxic. The shampoos and soaps and scented perfumes and candles, and there are so many ways toxins find their way to us, and it's just a drip of body burden across a lifestyle that can be as poisonous as anything. But if nothing else, get out of the tap water and at least get a basic filter. Like, that's one place you can diminish toxicity. And to your point about fast food, it is one of the most toxic things you could possibly consume. It's not the fat so much, it's the type of fat, and it's the type of toxic salt. So
Yeah.
put toxic fat and toxic salt in it. And the fact, I did an interview on my podcast with somebody named Zen Honeycutt, who pointed out, she works with moms across America. They studied fast food lunches, or fast food and school lunches, and found that the shocking level of heavy metal toxicity in those foods. And
Mm-hmm.
truthfully, you could test anybody's blood in the world, and they have pesticides and plastics and heavy metals in their bodies. It's just a question of, when does it become a burden?
Yeah.
So anything you can do to reduce that will go a long way. And sometimes it means, just like you said, grow your own food, save some money, learn a new
Absolutely.
skill,
It says also
and
have be could spend time with your kids, because
right.
they love doing
Yes.
stuff like that. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
a pluses on a lot of levels.